It was a cold morning, the kind that made people hurry along the sidewalk, wrapping their coats tighter to keep out the chill. The air carried a hint of fog, and the sound of traffic mixed with the early rustle of the city coming alive. On the corner of Pine Street, a woman named Loretta stood with her cane, feeling the ground beneath her feet and listening carefully to the familiar hum of the bus engine approaching from a distance. She was in her late 60s, a woman who had lost her sight many years ago, but never her strength. Every step she took was careful but confident, guided by memory more than sight. She knew every bump in the sidewalk, every turn, every sound that told her where she was. Neighbors knew her too. They often greeted her kindly or helped her cross when traffic grew busy. Most days passed without trouble. That morning, Loretta left home early because she had an appointment at the community center where she volunteered. She helped young people with reading and storytelling, using her voice to teach them that imagination could be stronger than sight. She often said that she might not see the world with her eyes anymore, but she could feel it in ways that many never would. As she walked along the street, tapping her cane gently ahead of her, she felt calm. She could tell when she was nearing the bus stop, because the ground sloped slightly downward and she could smell the bakery on the corner. She smiled when she caught the faint scent of warm bread. That smell had guided her for years. A few people waited nearby for the bus, their chatter soft and distant. She stood a few feet from the curb, like always, listening for the sound of the bus to slow down. But before it arrived, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, you're in the street. Get back on the sidewalk." Loretta froze. The voice was loud and harsh. She turned her head toward it, startled. "I'm on the sidewalk," she said calmly. "I know this route well." But the voice came again, closer this time, filled with irritation. "Don't argue with me, ma'am. You're halfway into the road." Loretta lifted her cane slightly and felt the edge beneath her feet. She knew exactly where she was. She wasn't anywhere near the road. "Officer, I'm blind," she said softly. "I walk this path every day. I assure you I'm standing safely." The man didn't seem to listen. He took a step closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "Blind or not, you can't just stand wherever you want," he said, his tone cutting. The crowd at the stop grew quiet. A woman nearby whispered something under her breath, but no one spoke up loud enough for the officer to hear. Loretta's hands tightened around her cane. She had faced people's impatience before, rude drivers, strangers who thought she was moving too slowly. But something about this moment felt heavier. She tried to stay calm. "Officer, please, I'm not causing any trouble. I'm just waiting for my bus." The officer sighed loudly, and then before Loretta could react, she felt a sudden tug. Her cane was yanked from her hand. She reached out instinctively, but it was too late. There was a sharp crack, the sound of something breaking clean in two. For a moment, everything went silent. Loretta's heart pounded. She stood there, hands trembling slightly, trying to understand what had just happened. She couldn't see him, but she could hear the officer toss something aside. "You don't need that thing if you can't follow directions," he muttered. The crowd gasped. A few people started recording on their phones. One voice shouted, "Hey man, she's blind!" But the officer didn't respond. Loretta felt the world spinning around her. She bent down, searching for the broken pieces of her cane. Her hand brushed against the cold ground, but she couldn't find them. Her sense of balance faltered. The sound of her own breathing grew louder in her ears. Someone finally stepped forward, a young woman who gently placed a hand on Loretta's shoulder. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "He broke your cane. Let me help you." Loretta tried to keep her composure, though her chest felt tight. "It's all right," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I just need to sit down." The young woman helped her toward the nearby bus bench. The officer stood back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't apologize. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked toward his car, leaving the pieces of the broken cane lying on the ground. When the bus arrived a few minutes later, the driver saw Loretta sitting there with the young woman beside her. He immediately recognized her. He'd picked her up almost every week for years. He rushed over, worry written all over his face. "Loretta, what happened?" he asked. Before she could answer, another bystander spoke up. "That cop over there broke her cane. Said she was in the street when she wasn't." The driver's face darkened. He knelt beside Loretta, picking up one of the broken pieces of her cane. "You sit tight," he said softly. "We'll get you home safe." As the bus doors closed behind her, Loretta held the two halves of her cane in her lap. Her hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the broken wood. She didn't cry, though her heart felt heavy. She kept replaying the moment in her head, the voice, the sound of the crack, the way everyone just stood there. The young woman who had helped her sat next to her on the bus, still shaken. "I recorded it," she said quietly. "Someone had to." "That wasn't right." Loretta nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. For the rest of the ride, no one spoke much. The other passengers kept glancing her way, their faces full of sympathy and disbelief. The driver tried to keep his focus on the road, but his jaw stayed tight. He'd seen unfair things before, but this felt different. It was so unnecessary, so cruel. When Loretta reached her stop, the driver insisted on walking her to her front door. He made sure she got inside safely, promising to check on her later. Inside, the small apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old heater. She sat in her favorite chair, the one by the window that faced the street, and laid the broken cane on her lap. Her fingers traced over the splintered edges again and again. That cane had been more than a tool. It was her independence. It had guided her through years of living without sight, through crowded sidewalks, busy markets, and quiet morning walks. Losing it that way felt personal. It felt like losing a piece of her dignity. Still, she tried to calm herself. She told herself this wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, and it probably wouldn't be the last. She had always believed that staying strong was the only way to keep moving forward. That evening, her phone rang. It was her neighbor who had seen the video online. "Loretta, it's everywhere," she said. "That officer breaking your cane, how people are furious." Loretta was surprised. "What video?" she asked. "Someone recorded the whole thing. It's on social media. Folks are demanding the police department do something." Loretta leaned back in her chair. She wasn't someone who cared for attention or online talk, but the thought of people seeing what happened brought mixed feelings. Maybe it would help others understand what she faced, or maybe it would bring more trouble. By nightfall, messages began flooding her phone. Reporters wanted to speak with her. Neighbors wanted to check on her. Friends offered to bring her food, help, anything she needed. She was grateful, but her mind stayed on one thought. How could something so small, so simple, turn into this storm? Across town, in a small office lit by fluorescent lights, Officer Peterson sat behind his desk, filling out paperwork like nothing had happened. He wrote in his report that he had stopped a pedestrian for being in the road, and that she had resisted instructions. There was no mention of her blindness, no mention of the broken cane. He thought the day was over, but the city had already begun to buzz with the story. Within hours, thousands of people shared the clip online. It showed everything. Loretta's calm voice, his harsh tone, the snap of the cane, and the crowd's shock. Comments poured in from all over. People were outraged. Loretta didn't sleep much that night. She sat by her window listening to the sound of cars passing by, thinking about what she would tell her son. He was away working, and she didn't want him to worry, but she knew he would find out eventually. He always did. She whispered softly into the quiet room as if speaking to herself. "I've been through worse. This won't break me." Didn't yet know that her quiet strength would soon become the center of a national story, or that the man who had humiliated her in public was about to learn who she really was, because somewhere miles away, her son was about to see that same video, and when he did, nothing in that small town would ever be the same again. The next morning, the city was buzzing in a way Loretta could almost feel without seeing. Her phone had been ringing nonstop. Messages of support, questions from reporters, even strangers offering to bring her new canes filled her inbox. Had barely slept. Her thoughts tangled between anger, confusion, and worry. But one message made her pause, a video link from a close friend. She tapped it, and her phone screen came alive with the familiar image of the morning's events. She could hear the crack of her cane breaking again, and the officer's harsh voice, sharper now with the memory. The video showed the crowd frozen, the bystander trying to help, and finally her own trembling hands searching the ground. It was difficult to watch. Each second reminded her of her vulnerability, her helplessness, and the sudden cruelty of someone who had no idea what she had endured in her life. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled through the comments. People were angry, calling for justice. Some offered words of comfort. Others criticized the officer for his behavior. She felt a lump in her throat. She didn't want to be in the spotlight, but seeing the reaction made her realize that something bigger had started. At that moment, her son Elijah saw the same video from hundreds of miles away. He had been working late at a veterans support center, helping soldiers adjust to civilian life. His phone buzzed constantly, but one notification stopped him cold. It was from a close friend who had seen the video online. Elijah opened it, and for a few seconds he could not believe what he was seeing. There she was, his mother, standing alone at the bus stop, cane broken, helpless, facing a man who had no respect for her at all. His heart raced. Rage and disbelief burned in his chest. He had seen tough situations, had faced danger in his service, but this was personal. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside, pacing. He felt an almost physical pull to go there, to see his mother, to make sure she was safe. But he couldn't. He was hundreds of miles away. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to act wisely, not just with emotion. This wasn't about anger. It was about justice. Back in her apartment, Loretta tried to calm herself. The calls kept coming. Some reporters wanted interviews. Others asked her to appear live on social media. She felt a wave of anxiety. She wasn't used to this attention. She had lived most of her life quietly, relying on her own strength and the kindness of neighbors. But now her life had become a public story. She thought about the young woman who had helped her, the bus driver who had supported her, and the strangers who had shown sympathy. Their faces flashed in her mind, and she realized that even in cruelty, there were threads of kindness. That gave her some comfort. Meanwhile, Elijah began making calls. He contacted his mother's friends and neighbors, asking for details about the incident. He wanted to know exactly what had happened and how she was coping. Each person described the scene with horror. Everyone agreed. The officer had overstepped, showing unnecessary force against a blind woman. Elijah's mind raced. He had been trained to assess situations, to weigh options, and to act decisively. He knew this required careful planning. Rushing into anger would only make things worse. He needed proof, witnesses, and a legal plan. He also knew his mother needed support, both emotional and practical. He called her that evening. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart pounded. "I'm fine, Elijah," she said softly, though he could hear the faint tremor in her voice. "It was frightening, but I'm okay." "Mom, I saw the video," he said quietly. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." She sighed. "I know, but I don't want to make trouble. I just want to be safe." "You're not making trouble," he said firmly. "You're standing up for yourself. And I'm going to help you. We're going to do this the right way." Over the next few days, Elijah worked tirelessly. He contacted civil rights lawyers, veterans organizations, and even some former colleagues who had experience in public accountability. Every phone call, every email, every message was another step toward building a case that couldn't be ignored. He wasn't just thinking about punishment for the officer. He was thinking about change, about making sure no blind person had to endure what his mother had faced. Meanwhile, the video continued to spread. Local news stations picked it up, showing the officer's aggressive actions, and the moment the cane was broken, viewers were shocked. Many shared their own experiences of discrimination or mistreatment, adding to the growing conversation about how people with disabilities were often treated unfairly. Social media was filled with comments. Petitions started circulating, and hashtags demanding justice for Loretta began trending. Loretta stayed quiet through it all. She was overwhelmed by the attention, but trusted her son to handle things. He would not let this get out of control. He had a plan, and he had patience, something she had taught him long ago. One evening, Elijah drove through the town where his mother lived. He wanted to see her, check on her, and plan the next steps. Standing outside her apartment, he could feel the weight of what had happened. People in the neighborhood recognized him as Loretta's son and stopped to offer support. Some had seen the video and were angry. Others simply wanted to make sure she was safe. When he finally went inside, his mother greeted him with a tired smile. "You came," she said. "I wanted to see you," he replied. "And I wanted to make sure you're okay." They sat together, her hands resting on the table, his fingers brushing lightly over hers. They didn't speak much at first. The silence was comforting, a moment to just be together. But soon they began to talk about what had happened, about the video, about the officer, and about the attention it had received. "You know," Loretta said softly, "I never thought something like this could happen. I've been careful my whole life, and yet—" "I know, Mom," Elijah said, "but you didn't do anything wrong. You were walking safely. He was the one who overstepped, and now people see that." They discussed what needed to happen next. Lawyers would be involved. The police department would have to respond. They had to be careful, but they also had to be firm. Elijah knew his mother's courage and wanted to protect it while turning this incident into a lesson for the whole community. The next morning, Elijah met with the lawyers. They discussed filing a formal complaint against the officer and preparing for public statements. They also planned for interviews with the media, but only if Loretta was ready. Elijah made sure every step was thoughtful, legal, and strategic. He wanted justice without unnecessary conflict, and he wanted to make sure his mother's dignity remained intact. Back in the neighborhood, people began gathering at the bus stop. Some held signs expressing support, others simply wanted to show they cared. Children who had grown up watching Loretta cross the street safely every day now understood the danger she had faced. Community members began talking about what they could do to prevent such incidents in the future. The officer, unaware of the growing storm, went about his work. He had no idea who he had confronted, or the network of support surrounding her. He still thought of the incident as minor, a small complaint that would fade with time. But the story was no longer in his hands. By the end of the week, the video had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. News stations interviewed neighbors, highlighting Loretta's story and the courage it took to continue her daily life despite obstacles. People were outraged, yes, but many were inspired. They saw a blind woman facing public humiliation with quiet strength and a son who would not allow injustice to go unchallenged. That night, Loretta sat by her window again, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the crowd at the bus stop, the young woman who had helped her, the bus driver, and her son. She realized that even in a world filled with unfairness, there were people willing to stand by her. That thought gave her strength. Elijah, back at his temporary apartment, watched the social media responses. He knew the battle wasn't over, but he also knew that public awareness was the first step. The officer would not be able to ignore the truth for long. And when the time came, they would be ready. The morning light faded into evening, but the story was just beginning. The video had brought attention, but it also brought hope. Hope that people would see that blind individuals deserved respect, that cruelty would not go unnoticed, and that a mother and son could turn a moment of pain into a story of courage, justice, and change. And somewhere, in the back of the officer's mind, though he had no idea yet, the first cracks of reckoning were beginning to form. The tension in the town grew with each passing day. The video of Loretta's cane being broken had gone viral, and people everywhere were talking about it. At first, the police department tried to ignore the attention, hoping it would fade, but it only got stronger. Local news stations picked up the story, and social media posts spread like wildfire. People were angry, confused, and outraged, but there were also voices of support for Loretta and calls for accountability. Inside her small apartment, Loretta sat quietly at the kitchen table, her hands folded over the broken cane. She felt a mixture of fear and disbelief. She had lived through a lot in her life, faced hardships no one else could imagine. But this public humiliation had cut deep. Her mind kept replaying the moment the officer yanked her cane, the sound of it snapping and the look on his face. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet she felt powerless. Her son Elijah had flown into town the day before. He had arranged for meetings with lawyers, advocates, and some trusted community members. He had also brought her a temporary replacement cane, one sturdy enough to navigate the streets but not as familiar as her old one. He tried to reassure her, but he could see the anxiety in her eyes. "We'll handle this, Mom," he said softly. "I promise. You won't have to face this alone." Loretta nodded, grateful for his presence. She trusted him completely. He had always been her protector, the person who seemed to understand her even when the world ignored her. Outside, the town was divided. Some people sided with the officer, claiming he had been enforcing the law. Others saw the situation clearly for what it was: unnecessary aggression against a vulnerable woman. Discussions at local cafes, workplaces, and community gatherings were filled with heated debates. The tension was palpable, but it also sparked an important conversation about how people with disabilities were treated and how authority figures should be held accountable. The officer, Peterson, remained at his post, unaware of the storm building around him. He had no idea who Loretta's son was, nor did he understand how widespread the outrage had become. To him, it was just another complaint, another incident to write in a report and move on. But things were far from over. Elijah had been meeting with the civil rights attorney who had agreed to take their case pro bono. They discussed every detail: the video evidence, witness statements, and the officer's history. They discovered that Peterson had a record of minor complaints, subtle but concerning incidents where people had felt disrespected or targeted. While nothing had led to formal consequences before, this time it was different. The evidence was clear and the public was watching. "The video is damning," the attorney said. "There's no way the department can ignore this, and with witnesses ready to support your mother, the pressure will only grow." Elijah nodded. He had expected as much. "We're not looking to humiliate anyone," he said firmly. "We want accountability. We want a change that ensures this doesn't happen again." While they planned their strategy, the community's response continued to escalate. A group of residents organized a peaceful protest outside the local police station. They held signs demanding justice for Loretta and better treatment for disabled residents. The atmosphere was serious but respectful. People chanted, spoke into megaphones, and told their own stories of being ignored or mistreated. Many wore ribbons or badges showing solidarity with Loretta. Inside the station, the chief of police was growing concerned. Calls from the media kept coming, and local leaders demanded answers. He called a meeting with his senior officers, including Peterson. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "We need to address this before it gets worse." Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't understand why so many people were upset. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong. He had enforced the law as he saw it. But the chief's gaze was firm and he could feel the tension building. "We're going to conduct a full internal review," the chief said. "We need statements from witnesses, any video footage, and a clear explanation of what happened." "This will not be ignored." Peterson swallowed hard. He had never been under this kind of scrutiny. The calm confidence he had relied on for years began to crack. He didn't know that the woman he humiliated had a son who would ensure this incident would not be brushed aside. He didn't know that Elijah had already begun gathering support from lawyers, activists, and veterans organizations. Back at Loretta's apartment, she and Elijah sat together, reviewing the plan the attorney had outlined. It involved submitting a formal complaint, requesting disciplinary action, and preparing for a potential public statement. The goal was not revenge, but accountability and education. Elijah explained each step carefully, making sure his mother felt comfortable with every decision. "I don't want to see anyone lose their job unfairly," Loretta said softly. "But I also want people to understand that what happened to me is not okay." "That's exactly why we're doing this, Mom," Elijah said. "We're showing that respect matters and no one should be treated this way." The next day, the attorney submitted the formal complaint. News outlets quickly reported it, highlighting Loretta's bravery and the growing call for justice. Interviews with witnesses added weight to the story. People described how the officer had approached her aggressively, how he broke her cane, and how bystanders tried to help. The narrative was clear. A blind woman had been humiliated in public and her community demanded accountability. Peterson's world began to unravel. Media coverage increased. Community meetings were held and social media continued to shine a spotlight on his actions. He remained at work, but each interaction felt heavier, every glance from a colleague filled with unspoken judgment. He had underestimated the ripple effect of his actions, and now he was facing the consequences. Meanwhile, Elijah focused on preparing for the next step. He planned to attend a public community meeting where residents would have the opportunity to speak to the police department. He wanted to ensure that his mother's voice was heard, that her story could inspire change rather than simply punish one man. On the day of the meeting, Loretta felt nervous but determined. She had learned to face life's challenges with quiet strength, and this was no different. She relied on her son's guidance, knowing he would support her every step of the way. As they entered the town hall, the room was filled with people. Neighbors, activists, and concerned citizens had come to witness the proceedings. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a sense of solidarity. Peterson sat at the front looking uneasy. He had been briefed on the meeting but had no idea who Loretta's son was or how prepared they were. He tried to appear confident, but the energy in the room was heavy, filled with anticipation. When it was Loretta's turn to speak, she took a deep breath. Her voice was calm but steady as she described the morning at the bus stop, the officer's aggressive behavior, and the breaking of her cane. She spoke not from anger but from a place of truth, sharing the fear, frustration, and humiliation she had felt. Elijah stood beside her, offering quiet support. He didn't speak for her, but his presence was a reminder that she was not alone. The room listened. Many moved to tears, others nodding in agreement. The story was no longer just hers. It had become a catalyst for conversation and reflection. After she spoke, Elijah addressed the room. He introduced himself as her son, explaining who he was and why he had come. His words were calm, direct, and firm. He emphasized the need for accountability, education, and change. He spoke about respect for people with disabilities, the importance of empathy, and the responsibility of those in positions of power. The crowd responded with applause, and even some officers in the room looked uncomfortable, but attentive. The chief of police took notes, understanding that ignoring the situation was no longer an option. That night, the video of the community meeting spread online, showing both Loretta's bravery and her son's strong but respectful stance. Public attention intensified, and Peterson began to feel the weight of his actions more than ever. He realized that the woman he had humiliated was not only resilient, but had a network of support that would ensure this story would not be forgotten. Back at her apartment, Loretta and Elijah sat together, exhausted but relieved. The first step had been taken. They had spoken, they had been heard, and they had shown the community that truth and courage mattered. "We did the right thing," Elijah said softly. Loretta nodded. "Yes, we did. And maybe this will help others too." They both knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more meetings, investigations, and public scrutiny. But for the first time since that cold morning, they felt a sense of hope. They had faced injustice together, and they were ready to see it through to the end. The town had begun to change. People were talking about respect, about treatment of the vulnerable, about accountability in law enforcement. And while one officer still sat at his desk unaware of what was coming, the seeds of awareness had been planted. Loretta's courage, combined with her son's determination, was creating a ripple effect that would continue to grow, challenging the status quo and reminding everyone that even in the face of cruelty, justice and dignity could prevail. The morning of the public meeting arrived with a mix of tension and anticipation. The hall was filled with residents, neighbors, reporters, and local leaders. People had come to hear about what happened to Loretta and to demand accountability, but many also wanted to see change in how the police interacted with the community. Outside, a small crowd waited, holding signs with messages of respect and empathy, showing solidarity for those who had been mistreated or ignored. Inside, Loretta sat quietly with her son Elijah beside her. Her fingers rested on her new cane, still different from the one that had been broken, but sturdy and familiar enough to give her a sense of security. She could hear the murmurs of the crowd, the shuffling of chairs, the rustle of papers, and the occasional click of a camera. Every sound told her that this day was important. Elijah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've got this," he whispered. "Just speak from your heart. I'll be right here." Loretta took a deep breath and nodded. She wasn't there to attack anyone. She was there to speak the truth, to share her experience, and to make sure this could never happen to another blind person. The police chief sat at the front, along with several senior officers, including Peterson. Peterson was tense, his usually confident posture replaced with visible discomfort. He had heard about the outrage, seen the social media backlash, and felt the pressure mounting. He tried to prepare himself, thinking he could defend his actions, but deep down, he knew the story wasn't in his favor. The chief called the meeting to order, acknowledging the community's concern and assuring them that a thorough review of the incident would be conducted. "We understand this is serious," he said. "We want to hear your voices and take the necessary steps to ensure this doesn't happen again." When it was Loretta's turn to speak, she stood slowly, her cane guiding her steps. The room quieted instantly. People could feel the weight of the moment, the courage it took for her to face a crowd filled with strangers, reporters, and the very officer who had humiliated her. She began in a calm, measured voice. "I have lived most of my life without sight," she said. "I have faced challenges every day, but I have always tried to live with dignity and independence. On that morning, I was doing nothing wrong. I was walking carefully, as I always do, when an officer approached me aggressively, took my cane, and broke it." She paused, feeling the tension in the room. Some people gasped, others nodded, and the reporters leaned in closer. She continued, explaining how helpless she had felt, how the sound of the cane snapping had shocked her, and how the bystanders had tried to help. "I am not angry," she said softly, "but I want people to understand that we all deserve respect. We all deserve to be treated with humanity." The room was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that carries the weight of truth. And then Elijah stepped forward. He introduced himself as Loretta's son and explained who he was and why he had come. His voice was calm but firm, commanding attention without shouting or threats. "I have seen my mother face many challenges in her life," he said. "She is strong, but she is also vulnerable in ways most people don't understand. What happened that morning was not just an attack on her. It was an attack on the dignity of everyone in this community. We are here to ensure that it never happens again." He spoke about accountability, about the responsibility of those in authority, and about the need for empathy in every action. His words were powerful because they came from a place of truth and love. He did not shout or demand revenge. He spoke about fairness, respect, and justice, about what it meant to protect a community rather than intimidate it. Peterson could feel the room shifting. The officers around him looked uneasy, and the chief was taking notes more carefully than ever. For the first time, Peterson realized that this was bigger than just a complaint or a single moment. He had underestimated the impact of his actions and the strength of a woman who had lived decades with challenges he could not imagine. After Elijah finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. People were moved, inspired, and even some skeptics nodded in understanding. The atmosphere was electric but not hostile. The community had witnessed courage, honesty, and the power of standing up for what is right. Later, outside the hall, reporters surrounded Loretta and her son. Cameras flashed, microphones were held close, and questions poured in. Loretta answered calmly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. She spoke about the importance of understanding, about teaching empathy to those in positions of power, and about protecting those who are vulnerable. Elijah spoke with her at her side, providing context and clarity, emphasizing that their goal was not to destroy anyone, but to ensure accountability and prevent similar incidents in the future. "This is about change," he said. "It's about making our community safer and more respectful for everyone." As the day wore on, the story continued to spread. The video of the meeting, showing both Loretta and Elijah, was shared widely online. People were inspired by the calm strength of a mother and the determined support of her son. Discussions about respect for people with disabilities, proper police conduct, and empathy and leadership were happening across the city, in homes, schools, and workplaces. Meanwhile, Peterson was facing the consequences in real time. Calls from the media, inquiries from the police department, and growing public pressure made it impossible for him to ignore what had happened. He began to feel the weight of his actions more acutely. For the first time, he saw that his behavior had consequences far beyond what he could have imagined. Back in Loretta's apartment that evening, she and Elijah reflected on the day. "I never expected so many people to listen," Loretta said quietly, running her hands over her replacement cane. "I only wanted to be safe, and now it feels like something bigger is happening." Elijah nodded. "You gave them the truth. That's powerful. People are paying attention, and change is coming. This isn't just about what happened to you, it's about everyone who has been treated unfairly." They talked late into the night, planning the next steps. There would be follow-up meetings with the police department, continued media coverage, and discussions with the civil rights attorney about the possibility of disciplinary action. They both knew it would not be easy, but they were ready to face it together. The story of that morning was no longer just a private memory of fear and humiliation. It had become a symbol, a story of courage, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Loretta's quiet strength and Elijah's calm determination had changed the narrative. What could have been a moment of defeat had become a catalyst for awareness and accountability. The town itself began to feel the effects. Conversations in schools, workplaces, and community centers shifted. People were thinking more about how they treated each other, how authority figures were held accountable, and how vulnerable members of the community could be protected. The incident became more than just a news story. It became a lesson in empathy, respect, and justice. Even for Peterson, the day left a mark. He sat in his office late that night, reviewing reports and videos, realizing that the actions he had taken were being scrutinized by hundreds of thousands of people. He had no idea how to undo what had happened. For the first time, he felt the consequences of his choices not just on paper, but in the eyes of the public and the community he was supposed to serve. Elijah knew this was only the beginning. The next steps would be challenging, but he also knew that his mother's voice and their commitment to justice had set a standard. They were no longer just seeking redress for one incident. They were shaping a movement, however small, that demanded respect for everyone, no matter their abilities or circumstances. That night, as Loretta rested, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. She had faced public humiliation, yet she had also faced it with dignity. She had felt fear, yet she had also felt support from her community and from her son. The broken cane was still on the table, but it no longer felt like a symbol of weakness. Instead, it was a reminder of her resilience and the power of speaking truth in the face of wrongdoing. Elijah sat beside her, reflecting on the day. He knew that change was rarely easy or immediate, but he also knew that courage and determination could shift the course of events. Their story was proof of that. Together they had confronted cruelty with strength, fear with dignity, and silence with truth, and somewhere, in the back of Peterson's mind, though he tried to ignore it, the realization was growing. He had faced a force far greater than authority or intimidation. He had faced the unwavering spirit of a mother and her son, determined to make their world a little fairer, a little safer, and a lot more respectful.